how does your relationship with like the musical instrument as an object, or in some cases as like an entire set, in the case of Chaos Bells or Prism Bells, you've talked about wanting to explore the relationship between the instrument and embodied performance. So going back to Chaos Bells, if I can find the image again, there's something like really intuitive about these sorts of instruments, like the percussive element to them, and then also like a very responsive sound that comes out, which is it purely digital? Is there any like acoustic pickup from inside the tubes?
No, it's totally digital, the sound.
So, yeah, what elements of an instrument then are important to your kind of your design philosophy for the types of things that you want to play?
It depends which instrument I'm designing, but Chaos Bells was designed with the intention of building a digital instrument that was larger than the performer's body. And that comes from, I've been getting on stages for the last 15 years as a solo electronic music performer. So, I started out that project really wanting to make very electronic music, but not really knowing how to do that live and not really kind of knowing where to look for examples of anyone else doing that. And so I started to design my own way of performing live, and it went through all these iterations from, okay, I've got a guitar and a looper pedal and I've got a drum pad, or a sampler, and then, I got rid of the guitar and got a 4-track tape machine, and would mess with that, and also a sampler. Or at one point I was doing tape loops live with like a synth and a drum machine to do it live as like weird live, like wacky techno. So I went through all of these different iterations, and every iteration it just felt really constrained behind a table. And way back I used to be in bands and play bass and just kind of jump around and use my whole body, and I really miss that on stage as an electronic musician. And so I thought, where is the instrument that's digital that you can really throw your body into, and what does using your body bring to electronic music performance? And so the point of this instrument is that it's so big, you do have to use your body to play it. You have to choose which tones to play because you can't play them all at once. It's 2 meters wide. So although there was a performer, Kunal Singha, he made up this performance move where he knelt in front. This was for the V&A actually. I commissioned him to do some performances at that installation, and he practiced with Chaos Bells for about a year. He was like, he's probably the performer who knows that instrument the best, because he came to my studio and would play that instrument all the time. He came up with this way of playing it where he knelt down in front of it and spread his arms out like an eagle, and then kind of raised all of the bottom tier notes at once, and then they all drone when you tilt them like that. So that's probably the most of the tones that have been played at once, although that's all the ones at the bottom, so you wouldn't be able to play all the ones at the top as well. But yeah, so the point of the instrument is for it to require physical kind of gestures and it being larger than you. It therefore creates different music, because if it all fit underneath your hands, you wouldn't have to make such choices. And so that's why also you can play it percussively, but you can also drone the instrument by tilting it. And it has very sensitive sound. synthesis. So the sound changes depending how hard you hit it or the angle of the drone. And if you tilt it too far, it goes into chaos mode, which is kind of
chaos mode?
Sounds like white noise. What's happening then is the system has just like too much energy in it. And once you let go of that, it kind of reverses out of the chaos mode into like a tone and then goes quiet again.
So when you say the system has too much energy in it, what's happening on the digital level? Is the instrument like self-interactive in that way, whereby if you're playing something over here, for instance, that's going to affect how something down here is working?
It may do, but not in the way that you're probably thinking. It's more physical. So in each of those pipes is an accelerometer. So that's a sensor that measures the tilt. So basically, you know, in your phone, the way that it can tell the orientation of whether it's up or sideways, that's an accelerometer. So what I did is I set it to recognize just the y-axis, so forwards and backwards swinging, okay? And then I assigned that angle to drive a physical modeling algorithm, which is essentially the coded kind of emulation of an electric guitar string.
Okay.
So when you drone it, it's almost like a digital electric guitar droning. And that means when you hit it with a mallet or your hands, it is swinging. So you get this kind of bell-like tone because it's like hitting it. But then when you drone it, you tilt it out, it'll drone longer because it's staying at that angle. So the energy, you asked me about the energy. So essentially when you have it at the angle, it's letting more and more into that. It's like driving harder and harder and harder that string synthesis.
Okay, yeah.
And so there is a point where you get like over 100, and that's where it goes kind of to white noise. Well, I don't think you could actually do it in the physical domain.
Yeah.
It'd be like, imagine getting an EBO and it's vibrating so hard that it just like goes on fire or something. Like
that'd be great. You should try that on stage. Set fire to your one-handed violin. How do you decide what sorts of sounds? So you talk about like synthesized electric guitar there, especially like, because that's not like if the first thing you might, or that might come to mind when like an instrument is called chaos bells is probably something more metallic, more bell sounding. But like, how do you decide and develop with a digital instrument where those kind of sounds come from and how they're driven and the origins or not of them?
Yeah. So I did make it more bell sounding in the higher register. So I added more harmonics into that to make it kind of a more bell-like, kind of frail kind of sound. And then the bass register is a more clear kind of bass tone. The reason I did that, well, a couple of reasons. One is I thought it sounded cool, but the other reason is that before building this massive digital instrument, I interviewed 7 performers of large acoustic instruments. So I interviewed a tuba player, an organ player, a player of the Jill. So that's a very large, almost xylophone style instrument, but it's from Africa and it's performed percussively. Interviewed a contrabassoon player, contrabass flute. Yeah, so 7 players of very large acoustic instruments, because it was interesting that there are really large acoustic instruments, but in the digital world, we don't really have a culture of large instruments. In fact, it's like instrument companies are just trying to make synths smaller and smaller and smaller. Like, let's make it fit on the desktop. Oh, let's make it fit on your watch. Let's make it fit on your ring. Like, do you know what I mean? And meanwhile, I was thinking, but I want to actually like kind of move my body on stage and play the music with my body. So I interviewed all of these performers who have a professional and creative practice based on their large instruments. And I wanted to know what is so special about those acoustic instruments. And so through interviewing them, I found out a lot of things about large acoustic instruments, and I put those ideas into the design of this instrument. And one of the things I found out is that large woodwind instruments have a very clear lower end sound, and that's why they're designed. They have a very large air chamber, and it lets this very clear bass tone in, and that's why actually they're newer designed instruments. The contrabass flute, the contrabassoon, they're actually only decades old rather than like, you know, other orchestral instruments which are centuries old. So the thing with those instruments is if you try to play in the really upper registers, that's not what they're designed for. So the sound is very frail, and they described it as alien, you know, and it's not a clear tone. So if you get on the contrabass flute and you play in the higher register, which is where a concert flute might be, it's not going to sound like a concert flute. It's going to sound like a really like strangely creepy, it'll still be the same tone, but the timbre is different. And so that's what I wanted to do with this instrument, is put more of a stranger timbre into that higher register.
That's really interesting. Like trying to, because as a digital instrument, you have like so much control over that kind of timbre, and then to build into your system that like emulating where a traditional instrument designer imagining this instrument is going to play more classical music, like would see it failing. You're like trying to bring those so that they're to the fore.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And the thing is that, you would never be like, who wants to play this higher register part? I'll give it to the contrabass flute. You'd say, I'll give it to the concert flute or the piccolo. But actually, the contrabass flute player would play the contrabass flute because not only do they get those deep tones, they also get those really quirky high-end tones. And so that is something that they can't do with the concert flute. So that means these large instruments have a special quality that the other instruments don't have. It's not like just adding an octave pedal or something.
Yeah.
And so that makes them have a real special position as an instrument. They have something special. So I wanted to make these large instruments have something special that smaller instruments didn't consider as the sound design.
And on stage, they're like unmissably taking up space.